it. For those of you watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, drop your comments down below. All engagement helps us grow the pod, so we greatly appreciate it. And for those of you listening on Spotify, Apple, or any of the other audio-only platforms, please follow, give us a 5-star review. All of that stuff helps us on those platforms as well. Before we get into the United stuff, let's start with Arsenal. You did play last night in the Champions League, game week 7, at home to Dinamo Zagreb. 3-0, quite a comfortable win actually. Scored early, scored late, scored in between. You're now in third in the group stages, 16 points, plus 12 goal difference. You're basically in the top 8, which means you're going to avoid those playoff games in February. So yeah, let's get into the game first. What did you make of the match and the result? Do you think it was a fair reflection of the game?
Yeah, I mean, overall I did. I think we had a lot of possession, but it seems like we actually did quite a lot with it. We created quite a lot of good chances. A lot of it was, again, the same kind of stuff. I know I saw a stat recently about from Sky Sports, which was terrible from their social media manager. Whoever's doing that, it was poorly worded and so misleading about how Arsenal have got the lowest attacks or goals through the middle. And it wasn't even supposed to show that. It was actually supposed to show what percentage of all of our goals come through the middle versus the wings. So you'd have the exact inverse. I think we were 19th of all the teams in terms of how many of our goals have come through what proportion of our goals have come through the middle. And if you were to inverse that, you'd see we'd be second on how many of our goals come from the wings. So that just reminded me, like, during this game, a lot of our stuff really came from the wings again. It was a lot of crosses into the box, a lot of good crosses, I think, from what I saw, and some pretty decent finishes. Again, really, really good and positive play from our wingers. I'm gonna really single them out first. I think obviously you have, a lot's been said about Kai Havertz, but he played decently well in this game. Got himself an assist and a goal. And yeah, Trossard pretty decent as well. Just in general, I think we played quite well. And I'll be honest with you, they weren't great, so we weren't having to fight up against a really, really difficult team to play. Again, we started Sterling. Even he was okay, but again, not really good enough, in my opinion, to continually start in this team. We finally saw him also, Arteta, not play flipping Partey at right back, at least start Partey at right back, which was nice. Just the conventionals. I mean, not conventional, but our defence actually had players playing in positions that they're familiar with. Zinchenko at left back, Gabriel in the middle with Kirill, and then Timber at right back. It just felt like a lot more of a natural lineup, even though I don't think those players are necessarily as good as our first starters, obviously. Then the Rice, Jorginho, Odegaard kind of middle, I'm fine with as well. Against this kind of team, I'm okay with not having like an enforcer in there really at the kind of 6th position, to just have Jorginho maybe dominating possession and dictating tempo. And then, yeah, Martinelli, Havertz, Sterling up top. Martinelli had a great game. I've got to call him out. He was really, really good. I think Rice was really good too. And I also want to call out Odegaard. Everyone's been calling him Ghost-Odegaard and No-Show-Odegaard and all these dons. I think he played really, really well yesterday. Got himself a goal at the end. It was obviously a bit of a charity goal in terms of being very, very sweaty and him kind of shinning it into the back of the net. But outside of that, I think he played really, really well. So overall, I'm happy with the performance. I think we were, I'm going to say, more clinical than we have been before. Not clinical, though. Still not clinical. Declan Rice missed a massive chance. Heads it closer to the corner flag than he does to the goal. And he's pretty much one-on-one with the goalkeeper. But outside of that, we were obviously clinical enough to get the win. And so I want to, again, hammer home playing well versus playing well enough to win, right? And I think in this game, we played well enough to win, to beat Dinamo Zagreb. Again, would I say that this is vintage Arsenal, the Arsenal of like last year and the year before? No. But we were better, especially considering the strength of our 11. The fact that, even though we're pretty high up in the Champions League table, there's still a lot to fight for in these games, which is it seems to be an effect of this new style, league table style Champions League, that you're never really finished. There's a lot more still riding on games. So it was, a game where we could potentially screw things up in the Champions League a little bit and make things a bit tighter than they needed to be. And I think given the strength of our squad, we played well enough to win. And again, I'm not overly happy with it, but again, given the strength of our squad, that's probably the best I've seen our let's say, B team or a large part of our B team like play in terms of contributing to wins and so on and so forth, right? So the fact that we can kind of put out a weaker squad and get a win, a pretty convincing win at that, I'm happy with that. But we do need to see better results in the Premier League now. We will get onto it, I'm sure, in a minute. But it's it was a good performance versus what happened the week before or the game before.
Yeah, I mean it's Dinamo Zagreb, isn't it? So I mean it's a good fixture to do this. They got slapped 9-2 or something by Bayern Munich. So the reality is, I mean, I know Bayern Munich is a good team.
One spot below City.
Yeah. And City have had like an all-time disgusting Champions League campaign. So that tells you, like, you know, where they sit. But you still got to beat the team in front of you. But yeah, I agree with your assessment. There's I think it's funny that Sky Sports stuff is interesting because, I mean, the correlations are there with what we see with our eyes, though. Like, you don't really need that stat, right? It's quite clear to see where your goals are coming from, and it's quite clear to see that also, like, you're throwing a lot of crosses in, so the goals are coming from the wings. Like, I know that we can see that with our eyes. We might not agree with it, we might not, but even prime time Arsenal, they may have not been dominated by wing play, but actually by one wing, with on the right hand side with Odegaard and Saka and Ben White and a lot of stuff coming from that side. So I don't get it. I don't feel like that's like any kind of astounding stat or piece of news to share with anyone. It's quite obvious to understand. I think it's also
just a tactic. It's a tactic to be able to get people to retweet it, because the way it's worded and how poorly it was worded allows other fans to jump onto us and pile on and say, "Hey, you're 19th in the table for goals through the middle."
It's the Bolton narrative, isn't it? It's the Bolton.
That wasn't even the truth, though. That's not even the truth, though. Like, if they were to actually put up a stat of us just completely, not as a proportion of all of our goals, just how many goals have you scored through the middle, then fine, you can go and say whatever, because I'm sure we'd be somewhere between 10th and probably 15th. But to go and say that we're 19th for, chances created or goals scored through the middle is just blatantly misleading when it's actually talking about proportion of our goals scored or our chances created. So
just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter either, because who cares where the goals come from? You've got to score the goals. And I think the only thing, or the big thing that Arsenal fans, and I know you've been talking about on the pod, is just creating enough chances, because taking shots doesn't necessarily equal chances. And then also having a higher conversion rate, like you just mentioned. And in this game, you did have a slightly higher conversion rate, hence scoring 3 goals. And you were playing a team as well that couldn't hurt you. You know, it was kind of a game where you're unlikely to get a Son deflected goal or, a Tielemans and a Watkins goal out of nothing, because they don't have the quality. So that's essentially what you've got to try and aim for regularly now, consistently. And like you said, play well enough to win and defend well enough to keep clean sheets, because I think that's also something that people haven't really flagged. Not saying that your defence has been poor or anything like that. You're still one of the best defensive teams in the league. But it's the frequency of clean sheets you had last season was nuts. Like, Raya finished, obviously, with the Golden Glove and all that kind of stuff. And the defence was sturdy and miserly. You didn't concede many goals. And I feel like you've missed out on a bit of luck this season, or the opposition team have been extremely clinical when they've had the chances and then goals come. I don't feel like you've made catastrophic mistakes in lots of these games to keep to avoid clean sheets. But if you do get them, you'll win. Right?
It's the same thing that we said before. That, like, I'm looking at a lot of the goals that we concede, a lot of them, not all of them, and saying, like, I don't know who to blame for this. This just seems like everyone's making a little bit of an error, right, in terms of positioning or whatever else. And it looks like all of the goals are goals that we can do nothing about, which frustrates me more. And I think based off of, like, the consistency in terms of selection of our back line, and I'm going to say the 6 as well, I'm not surprised why we let in so many goals, right? When we're having to constantly deal with injuries, Calafiori's in, then he's out. Even when he is playing, he's clearly not quite as defensively minded as you'd want him to be in terms of keeping clean sheets. But you've got him coming in and out of the team every 5 seconds. You've got Timber coming in and out of the team every 5 seconds. You've got Partey having to play right back. You've got him sometimes playing 6. You've got sometimes Declan Rice playing 6. It's like, I don't blame us at all, because I've said it many times before. When it comes to defending well, you need to have, in my opinion, a set goalkeeper, a set back four, and a set six or DM. When you've got that and you've got consistency from them and they actually play frequently, and you don't have constantly one or two or three of those players changing, you tend to be able to build this like rhythm between that back line. And I think that's what we definitely have had last season. Like, we had a lot of rhythm. It was a very similar team every week. Of course, we sometimes had Zinchenko coming in and out of that, right? That was really the area where we probably had to experiment the most. But we had people like Ben White, who was a fixture of that team. We had people like Gabriel, Raya, and Saliba that were fixtures of that team. Maybe Partey was coming and going every now and then, but it was either him or Rice. That was the one of the two choices, and it was probably mostly Rice because Partey was injured for most of that season, right? So it really was just a left back position, whether it was Zinchenko or Kiwi or somebody else playing in that position. That was the only change that we really saw. So you could build what I believe is a much stronger and tighter knit group of defenders, which we have not been able to do this season, which has, in my opinion, led to just errors in communication. Like, I'm going here, so you go there, right? Like, we haven't necessarily been able to build that. And I'd even say when Calafiori is playing in our like preferred back line, he still has not yet built up the rapport with the rest of the defenders as to knowing where he needs to be. And, you know, again, his positioning is probably the thing that's letting him down, because we're getting balls over the top of the back of him and so on and so forth, which are leading to goals, right? So more than ever, defense is about rapport and consistency and having the same starting back line as frequently as you can. And we just haven't had that this season. So I'm not surprised that we've let in more goals. I also think that that's partly on Arteta, because he's made some decisions that he probably didn't need to make. Because at this point, Kiwior surely has some level of rapport with the rest of these guys, and he's not utilising them as a centre-back. Instead, he's putting Partey at right-back instead of putting Timber at right-back and sticking Kiwior in the middle. So I won't drone on about it, but it is, we do have a goal like conceding problem. And I think I'm putting my finger on it as being injuries and Arteta's selection choices. The two of those things culminate in a much leakier defence for Arsenal.
Yeah, and it's not a major difference. It's just, yeah, like I said, those clean sheets help you turn tight games where you're playing the way that you've described, like playing well enough to get a win. That's going to be a factor in getting them across the line. You know, there's all the sayings about, you know, attack wins you games, defense wins you titles or trophies, and it's true, because, you know, if the attack only needs to fire once, if the defense does their job, that's enough to win. You can have Pippa and Zaghi up front missing all the chances all you want. As long as you get one goal that goes in, that's enough, right? So yeah, if you get back to that, getting those clean sheets, I think, you know, the results will go in a positive fashion, and yeah, you should pick up loads more wins. So yeah, let's go on to the Premier League stuff then quickly for Arsenal and wrap up this segment. During the week, you had the North London derby on the Wednesday, which was a bit of a weird timing for that game, but Arsenal got the win 2-1 in the end. Should have been probably more comfortable, but I'll get into your take on it in a little bit. And then, yeah, the big game of the weekend for you at home to Villa ended 2-2, 2-0 up. And unfortunately, Villa pegged 2 goals back. But even then, very controversial. Got a third goal with Marino striking it, deflecting off Kai Havertz, ruled out for alleged handball. So let's get into your take on the games as a duo. What did you make of the results, and do you think 2-1 against Spurs and 2-2 against Villa were fair?
I think the 2-1 against Spurs was fair in the fact that we won. We should have won that game, and I think we probably should have won by a slightly wider margin. I'm not going to talk much more about that one. I think I'm happy to get the win. It's against Tottenham. We've got to win those games, and I think had we not won that game, anything other than a win in that game would have, you know, cranked up the pressure on Arteta and this team a lot more. So very happy to obviously get that win. Again, I don't think it was a very vintage North London derby. I think neither team really played all that well, but I think again we played well enough to win. The game against Villa is a different story. I think obviously, I mean, I don't want to keep coming back to it, man, but like, again, we should be winning that game. When I look back at all the stats, when I watched what happened in the game, the difference between us and them was they were clinical. They got chances, they scored them, right? We got numerous chances, and didn't score enough of them, right? We should have been closing out that game after 2-0. The fact that we immediately let them back into the game with the first goal, and then basically just allowed them to ride momentum and get a second goal, and they were basically so clinical with all their chances. The fact that we did that is mental, right? Like, we ended up having bloody 18 shots with only 6 of them on target, right? But again, we created more big chances and should have scored them, right? So I'm frustrated with, again, the fact that, number one, attacking wise, we weren't clinical enough to really put them away, and number two, I'm frustrated with the fact that Thomas Partey, who is the player that is playing out of position of all of those players, right? He's the one that is most out of position, is the reason why we let 2 goals in, right? Of course, the first goal I can also blame Marino too, because it's just poor tracking of the man. The fact that you're nearly a foot taller than Yuri Tielemans and you're letting him win a header against you is shocking. But the fact that Partey is not closing down Luca Digne, who's probably the best part of Luca Digne's game is his crossing. The fact that he's not being closed down is shocking, right? Like, Thomas Partey clearly does not know how to play right back, and yet we continually play him there, right? It'd be very different if we were playing like a back 3 or a back 5 and he was playing RCB or something like that. That would be fine. But the right back position, you need to have legs. You need to be able to close people down. You need to be able to run forward. You need to be able to get back. While Thomas Partey has been good this season, the one thing I can say about him is he does not have legs. He's not closing people down. He's not bombing forward, and he's not getting back. And yet we continually play him there against a team that is strong on the wings. They've got Matty Cash on one side, strong right back, right? Or he's a strong fullback. You've got Luca Digne on the other side, or Ian Maatson, whoever it is they want to play at those positions. They've got strong wing backs, right? Or strong fullbacks. Then on top of that, you've got Morgan Rogers on one side, who's probably one of the strongest runners with the ball. And you've got Ramsey on the other side, who's been playing really, really well for them, despite not being on his like A game in that match. So I just don't understand the thinking that you get there, that where you say, okay, I'm going to play Thomas Partey against the 2 of them lot, when I've got Odegaard in front of him and Martinelli on the right wing. Yeah, I mean, like, Martinelli is usually good. He tracks back a lot. But even he's not going to be that used to playing on the right wing and having to try and, fight against people that are going to be cutting in onto his weaker foot. So I think it was a really weird decision to play Partey again. When you've got Timber there, you could have played him at right back. You could have started Kiwior in centre. Like, it's just a really weird idea to do that, especially when I'm now seeing like rumours that we might play Rice at centre back. Like, why wouldn't you have done that then? Like, Villa is a difficult game to play at the best of times, right? And we've got to play them at home. We know they're somewhat of our bogey team, even though we're starting, like, I'm going to start needing 2 hands to count all the bogey teams we've got. And we play Partey at right back, and he's literally at fault for both the goals. The first one, letting Luca Digne cross it. The second one, he ends up being 2 meters away from Watkins by the time Watkins gets his foot on the ball. And he's playing like a phantom offside trap where no one else is playing that. No one else is moving up. I'm thinking to myself, like, has he been given some specific instruction where the rest of the lads have not been given that instruction? Or is he just like in the bed and completely forgetting about that? Like, we're not playing an offside trap. Why are you moving up? Track your man. Especially when it's Ollie Watkins, who literally does not miss against us. He always scores. You give him 1 chance, he gets 1 goal. You give him 10 chances, he gets 10 goals against us. He's clearly an Arsenal fan growing up, but my man does not give a shit when he plays us. He batters us left, right and centre every single time he plays us. And Thomas Partey's giving him that much space. And he smashes it in off the bar where Raya's got nothing he can do about it. So, honestly, it's poor. Like, defensively poor, attacking-wise, again, it's just more of the same, not clinical enough. And again, we've let Liverpool increase the lead on us. So, honestly, I'm tired of that game. I don't want to see us play Aston Villa again for a while. I don't want to see Thomas Partey play right back again. If I see Thomas Partey play right back again, Mikel Arteta has learned nothing, right? Unless we've got even more serious injury problems than we've got right now. If I see Thomas Partey start at right back instead of Kiwior starting in the middle and Timber out right, I'm going to be livid.
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
this is not the time. If we're playing Ipswich or someone else, fine, go and do what you want to do. Yeah, and even Ipswich are actually good. If we're playing, let's say, someone even worse, right? If we're playing Leicester City or someone who can't get a win right now, can't get a point. If we're doing it against them, fine, mate. If we're doing it against Dinamo Zagreb even, fine. But you're doing it against Aston Villa.
I don't know, man. I agree with you. I think It's a weird one. If you have literally every single player who can play right back out, I understand why it's a needs must, right? Obviously, Partey has some attributes that Arteta thinks could cover as the inverted midfielder at right back, right? Which I kind of understand. But when you have still a couple of options to play right back, and most certainly Timber's proven that, I'm not. All right, let's stop messing about, right? Timber's best position is right back. I know he can play left back. I know he can play centre back. I know he can play DM even. He's a very good player. We were linked with him for years. Like, we really like he's obviously a very good player, very versatile. And that's part of the reason why he's an attractive prospect. But his best position for you, just objectively speaking, has been right back. He's got assists. He's shown that he's able to bomb. He's shown that he's able to do attacking stuff, which there were points where I was kind of doubting whether he could do that. He's shown he can be a very, very competent right back and it's his best position. If he can do that, you've got enough centre-backs to shuffle the pack and you've got enough left-backs to shuffle the pack that you don't ever need to see Partey right back. So it's totally by choice at this point. And I agree with you completely. Choosing Villa to do that, I'm trying to think, what the hell is the logic? Maybe he thinks putting a stronger right back there to take on Morgan Rogers increases the chances, but that's stupid because you've still got to defend potentially Ollie Watkins and loads of like nimble strikers that they've got and attackers. And you've just pointed out all the things that Thomas Partey doesn't have or the attributes that he's lacking to be able to do that well at right back, right? So it's a baffling one, and it did cause the result. It was a clear correlation between Thomas Partey's misgivings and the 2 goals that Aston Villa scored. But you still go back to the other point. You weren't peppering chances, but six on target. I think there was 4 big chances created, right? You still could have scored a few more goals to get the win, right? We haven't even talked about the Havertz, deflection part, which I know you think is quite dubious. So I understand where the frustration comes. It's kind of like not to quote Patty Evra's thing, but it is Netflix the next season of the same show with these performances. I know he was talking about where you finish at the end of every season, but I'm talking about these recent performances. They go in a lot of the same ways. Not all the results are being the same. You've obviously drawn this. You went out in the cup to us. You lost to Newcastle, so you've got different results, but the same kind of performances.
This is exactly the time where last season, if we weren't clinical enough in front of goal, our defence would have carried us through. And this is where people say defence wins titles, right? Because at the end of the day, you can't keep letting leads slip, right? And last season, we wouldn't have done this, right? Maybe there was a couple of games at the end of the season where our asses fell out again. But generally speaking, in the middle of the season, when it was 22 games in, we weren't doing this, right? So we've always had a clinical problem, right? Saka, Martinelli were really the most clinical players that we had in terms of in front of goal, with Trossard coming off the bench. But we've never had a clinical striker. Never, right? Gabby Jesus, remember everyone joking about him like he's not a striker that scores, right? When he came out and said that. There's a reason why he said that, because it's true. He's not a striker that scores, generally speaking, unless we're counting that little burst he had recently, right? But Havertz is also not. So this is the same problem we had last year, right? I think last year, if we had a clinical striker, we would have gone through and won, right? We probably would have gone on to win the league, I think, in my personal opinion, right? But we've got the same problem this season, but now we've also got a defensive problem. So we are letting more leads slip. We're, in general, still having the same problem with not being able to finish our dinner all the time. Now we've got an even worse problem because we haven't got Saka here, who was the one that was probably most clinical out of all of our forwards. So it's just when people say it's a regression, I understand what they're saying. I don't think it's a regression in terms of like we're a worse team, but we're definitely like showing more weakness than we did last year. And I get it. It's hard to keep up like a strength the whole time, all the time. And you're always going to have some injury problems, and it's going to be like the variance, as people like the ITKs talk about, right? There's always going to be a certain amount of variance season on season where, some seasons you get lucky and you don't have any problems and you end up having, conceding only 29 goals. But it's the 22 games in, basically halfway through the season, we've already conceded 21, mate. We've got 8 more goals left to concede before we top our tally from last season. Whereas goals-wise, we're pretty much the same. I think last season we ended up scoring like 91 goals. We're on about 44. Yeah. So we'll probably finish in the 80s somewhere, sure. So we haven't scored quite as much as last season. But we're going to end up conceding way more goals this season than last season. So
that's the differential for sure. That's the differential for sure. And I know you're right. I agree. If you had a clinical striker, you might be winning these games 3-2, 2-1s, and whatever, just about nicking the result, which would ultimately get you more points. But a thing to still remember is, and it's kind of been lost in all of this, like I know it's a big push to get you a striker, and you do need one, but I think some fans are going overboard with we're creating chances, we're not being clinical. No team is ultra clinical, by the way. A lot of teams create 6 chances a game and only score 2 or 3, right? That's why conversion rates are always looked at when you compare like strikers and teams and stuff like this, because the conversion rate, the higher the conversion rate obviously signals the better the attacking team. But when you look at those stats, no one's like 50, 60%. No one. Even the greats in the game, no one's that high, right? So what you're looking for is an incremental change. And some fans are acting like, we've created 6 chances, how can we miss them, blah, blah, blah. You're going to miss chances, mate. Even the best strikers, the most clinical bagsmen, miss some chances. You don't see them convert every single week, right? How many times have we mocked Haaland for missing chances and he still ends up with 40 goals? You can create loads of chances. Liverpool create like even more than the numbers that we're talking about with Arsenal. The prime cities used to create even more. So it's a combination. And I feel like the defence, because they've been so good, a lot of fans are not, looking at them enough. I'm not saying you have to hammer them, but not saying like there is an imbalance. There is something going on wrong. Either it's tactically or the injuries or whatever combination has caused your defence to also put you into this situation as well. It's just because you've got Havertz shouldering things and like there's those flashpoint moments on the attack that look catastrophic.
But it's also
right?
because we're being compared against Liverpool, right? Who have been, let's be honest, they have been mad clinical. Right? I know what you're saying, right? I know everyone misses chances. Not as much recently, but they've scored 50 goals already, mate, and we've got 43. Yeah. So when you look at it, they are more clinical than we are, right? Yeah. And they're having a bit of a wobble now. Their wobble is resulting in them drawing a couple games. Our wobble means that we start to lose games. But the big issue, I agree with you 100%, right, is that we can't only go in on the clinical nature of our team. I will say that, generally speaking, last season we were not clinical too, but we were still more clinical, right? We had to we relied heavily on Saka, right? And now that we don't have Saka, it's all the more obvious the lack of clinical nature we have in the fucking striker position, which is, let's be honest, Saka, Martinelli and Trossard have papered over the cracks of having a striker for 2 years. And now when they're not firing in Martinelli's case or Trossard's case, or they're not around in Saka's case, everyone's like, holy shit, we really do have a big problem with our striker. And they're starting to realise 60 million down the drain might have been right. Maybe that chart was right because he can't finish anything, right? He's shouldering he's doing all kinds, he's booting it over the bar, whatever. So that's why everyone's focusing on that. But I agree with you, right? Like, people are not focusing on the fact that even when we did have a fully fit squad and we were playing Calafiore at left back, we were still letting in a good amount of goals. So we're not as defensively solid as we were last season. But I also think people cut us a bit more slack in the fact that, like, you're seeing change around who we're having to play there, and injuries here and injuries there. Yeah. So people are using that as maybe an excuse to paper over the cracks of our defensive situation right now, right? But in general, I think most people are looking towards the striker position because they've always been upset with it. And the fact is, a lot of Arsenal fans convinced themselves, including myself, that Havertz was not so bad, right? And that he would be good enough for us to still go and win a title, right? And we don't have to be world class in every position. You can have a couple of positions where you got role players that just kind of do their job, they score enough here and there, and they get on with it and they contribute to you winning, right? Which is why when he was getting man sent off and doing all kinds of dirtiness during Man City, like against Man City or against our rivals, everyone was loving him and saying, yeah, he's a role player, he doesn't score, but he does all these other important things. But now they're like, I need you to score, bro. You're in front of goal, 2 yards out, multiple times in games where we need you to score because we end up drawing or losing them, and you're not doing it. Yeah, so I understand their frustration, of course, but it needs to be a more balanced argument. I agree.
Yeah, I hear it. It's kind of like feeling like you've been duped, right? So then you like have more anger towards it because you feel a bit emotionally attached to. It's a roller coaster. The Havertz one has well and truly been an absolute roller coaster for you lot. But rival fans, we probably quite enjoy it. But...
Bye.